Before the dark secrets of Doris Day's marriages, violence, infidelity, betrayal, and a financial scam that shocked Hollywood came to light one by one, everyone in America thought she was the epitome of kindness, innocence, and perfection. From a covert affair with a married man until her marriage to Al Jordan, when she endured physical abuse, control, and jealousy during her pregnancy, she lived in constant fear. The biggest surprise, however, came from her third husband, Martin Melcher, whom she fully trusted, only to discover that she was confronted with crippling debt and an unimaginably harsh reality. What, then, did Doris Day actually experience? And why did such secrets not come to light for decades? On April 3, 1922, Doris Day was born in Cincinnati into a German-American family. William Joseph Kappelhoff and Alma Sophia Kappelhoff were her parents. Doris had a quiet upbringing until her parents' marriage broke down when she was 10 years old due to her father's extramarital affair. A young girl's sense of security was shaken by that incident, which also left a void in the household. From a young age, Doris had to learn how to deal with emotional suffering, loneliness, and loss that she had never anticipated. Doris Day had a strong love for dancing as a child. The majority of her time was devoted to training, competing, and dreaming of becoming a well-known professional dancer. But fate led her along a different path. She was still a young woman trying to make a name for herself in the very competitive entertainment industry in 1941 when she was only 19 years old. Doris went to music and started singing with touring bands when her goal of becoming a dancer was dashed by a terrible car accident. Al Jordan, an elderly trombone player who had previously played with Barney Rapp's band, was someone she met during that time. Jordan seemed to be the epitome of maturity and experience from the moment they first met. His attention provided Doris, a young woman who had recently experienced one of the greatest tragedies of her life, with the sense of stability she had been longing for. In spite of the unpredictability of an artist's life, his kind words, kind actions, and serene manner persuaded her that she had at last found a guy with whom she could create a secure future. Love arrived more quickly than Doris could comprehend. In April 1941, after a brief courtship, she consented to marry Al Jordan. Doris had all the faith and optimism of a lady who was genuinely in love when she got married, despite her youthful appearance. She thought that the future would be a tranquil house where she could follow her artistic love and have a happy family, just like so many other women had imagined. However, things started to alter in ways Doris could never have predicted just a few days after the wedding. The man she had fallen in love with appeared to vanish entirely. He was replaced by an Al Jordan who was obsessed by distrust, rage, and an overpowering need for dominance. He started interrogating Doris about every interaction she had, everyone she encountered, and even her co-workers on stage. Their marital house soon became a tense environment due to Jordan's compulsive jealousy. Later on, Doris would admit that she hardly had any more freedom to talk to friends or co-workers. An explanation was needed for every phone call, performance, and even out-of-home excursion. Doris used to be a happy, vivacious young woman, but with time, she became silent, cautious, and plagued by worry all the time. However, emotional regulation was just the start. Physical violence soon became a part of the marriage. Doris's memoirs reveals that she was frequently the victim of her husband's inexplicable fits of fury. She became aware that the marriage she had just entered was a cage with no way out after witnessing the shouting, the devastation, and finally the beatings. When Doris Day found out she was pregnant in 1942, the most agonizing chapter started. In an otherwise gloomy and agonizing time, it was a rare glimmer of hope for her. Doris thought the kid may offer fresh hope and a greater sense of purpose in life. However, Al Jordan's pregnancy turned out to be the very thing that made his brutality more apparent than before. Doris would later disclose that Jordan continuously pressed her to have an abortion since he did not want a child. His violence increased to an even more horrifying degree when Doris adamantly refused and insisted on keeping the baby. The beatings were no longer the product of fleeting rage. Instead, they were acts carried out with the specific goal of miscarrying her. When Doris's autobiography was released, this turned out to be one of the most startling discoveries. Later on, Doris acknowledged that one of the scariest times in her life was during her pregnancy. She never knew what she would have to deal with when she woke up each morning. She had to struggle to keep the delicate life growing inside of her safe while simultaneously defending herself. The mental agony and physical suffering almost completely destroyed her youth. Nevertheless, Doris refused to give up even amid that living nightmare. She protected her child with remarkable fortitude. Terrence Paul Jordan, her son, was born safely in 1942. In addition to being a triumph of motherhood, his birth demonstrated Doris's incredible fortitude amid the most trying time in her life. After less than 2 years of marriage, Doris Day and Al Jordan's union came to an end in February 1943. Despite the short duration of the marriage, the emotional damage she experienced would last for decades. Her third husband adopted her son years later, renaming him Terrence Melcher, who would go on to play a significant role in the American music industry. The American audience was genuinely shocked when Doris Day eventually told the truth in her autobiography. Few people could believe that the woman who always had a kind smile, a lovely voice, and an idealized appearance had formerly experienced a violent, tearful, and terrifying marriage. However, it was that taught Doris how to overcome that terrible period, become stronger, and eventually become one of Hollywood's most enduring legends. However, the truth that followed would leave Hollywood even more shocked if people thought that Doris Day's survival of a horrific marriage with an abusive husband was the darkest period of her life. Because during that time, Doris discreetly entered a relationship that, if revealed at the time, could have totally destroyed the carefully constructed image that movie studios had spent years creating, even though her old wounds had just begun to heal and everyone in America was beginning to view her as the ideal representation of innocence, grace, and virtue. It was not your typical romantic relationship. That man seemed like deliverance to Doris Day at the most lonely time in her life, when she was still dealing with the psychological wounds of an abusive marriage. He was intelligent, responsible, and perceptive, and he gave Doris the impression that she had at last achieved serenity via music, until she came to the realization that she had fallen in love with someone who would never be her true love. Doris Day first acknowledged that she had once had a romantic relationship with a married guy in the memoir that was released many years later. She just left behind a few short lines that shocked her fans, but she never disclosed his name or verified his identity. Doris was more than just a celebrity since was important to the American audience at the time. She was a symbol of morality. Hollywood proudly portrayed her as the perfect woman. That same woman was now admitting that she had once had an affair in secret. One name kept coming up in backstage rumors as biographers started stitching together the bits of memories left behind years later. Patrick O'Neal, the captivating-eyed actor, the graceful demeanor, and an already enigmatic private life. Despite the lack of official confirmation, their overlapping appearances, covert contacts following filming, and anecdotes from industry insiders prompted many to speculate that Patrick might have been the man who inspired Doris to take all risks. After filming, there were first only lengthy discussions. Then there were late dinners at unidentified locations. Then followed phone calls at midnight when everyone in Hollywood had already gone to bed. Doris was aware of his marriage. She was aware that she shouldn't continue. However, someone who has endured too much suffering may occasionally confuse benevolence with fate. Walking away became more difficult as she descended more. Then the harsh face of truth started to show. Last-minute cancellations of dates. The instant someone entered the room, phone calls immediately halted. Holidays by oneself. Just wait for me a little longer, promises were made repeatedly, incessantly. Eventually, Doris came to a painful discovery. It wasn't her who was selected. She was just a hidden that was never supposed to be seen. Millions of followers were really shocked when this reality came to light several years later. The lady who everyone in America thought was the epitome of purity had also fallen in love with the wrong person, had moments of weakness, and risked everything for an unfulfilling love. Even more agonizingly, Doris Day was trapped once more after fleeing a man who had used violence to rule her life. This time, it was through words of love that were never supposed to come to pass rather than fists and. However, if the public's perception of Doris Day was damaged by her covert relationship with a married man, the tragedy that ensued would be the blow that left Hollywood stunned. Because this time, the guy Doris trusted more than anyone else in the world, rather than an abusive husband or a hidden lover, was the one who would bring her to her knees. Her manager, her life companion, her third husband, and the man who controlled her entire career. Melcher Martin. Doris Day was at the pinnacle of her fame when she first met Martin Melcher in the early 1950s. Doris became one of the most influential female performers in America thanks to a string of hit movies, record sales in the millions, and lucrative endorsement deals. Millions of people could only imagine the wealth, fame, and career she possessed. However, Doris didn't really need extra attention given the emotional devastation of her past relationships. He was old enough to give her a sense of security. That's when Martin showed up. He was composed, professional, knowledgeable about the entertainment industry, and most significantly, he knew how to convince Doris that she had at last found a true home. In contrast to the men who had preceded him, Martin did not arrive with dramatic statements or fervent promises. He showed up as a man who knew how to keep the lady he loved safe, stable, and full of wise counsel. For a Doris who had endured loneliness, abuse, and betrayal, Martin appeared to be the living example of the tranquility she had been longing for. After they were married in 1951, Martin became more than just Doris's husband. Over time, he started to dominate almost every part of her life. Work schedules, movie contracts, personal finances, investments, taxes, and real estate are just a few examples. Doris trusted him with everything. Later, friends remarked that because Doris trusted Martin more than she trusted herself, she seldom ever looked at her own financial records. If there was a contract to sign, she signed it. She agreed with Martin if he indicated that investing was a good idea. That didn't seem like control to Doris. Love was involved.